Hello, everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. How is everyone doing this evening? Happy and blessed Monday. We are in the very holy season of Easter, which will last for the next 40-ish days or so until the great season of Pentecost. So a blessed Easter still to everyone out there. Just finished the great octave of Easter with yesterday's Quasimodo or Low Sunday. And welcome to episode 551 of the Welcome to Asgard podcast, where it's been a bit, right? We obviously had Easter, the beginning of the Easter season with the beautiful Easter Vigil Mass on Holy Saturday, the Easter Sunday liturgy, of course, the 8 days inclusive of that Sunday of the octave of Easter, and we are now in the midst of the entire season, and a lot indeed has happened. So last week I had to cancel the show because we were driving back from the great city of New Orleans, where I was spending some time with some family. Beautiful liturgy down there at the great St. Patrick's Church. If you've never been to St. Patrick's in New Orleans, I highly recommend it, especially their Latin Mass. It is a beautiful, beautiful liturgy, and the entire Easter Vigil Mass itself, the entire Holy Saturday night Mass, Easter Vigil Mass was done with the traditional Latin Mass, and it was just, again, absolutely gorgeous. But because we were driving back on Monday, had to postpone because I was just exhausted. And then this past weekend, we got a lot of people sick here over at the Asgardian household. Friday night especially, when I tried jumping back on FNT, I was literally about to vomit. And then subsequently did end up vomiting later that night, and it was not fun. So basically one of those stomach bugs that affected me for about 24 hours, had some lingering effects after. Luckily, feeling a lot better today, so we'll see how long I'm able to go. But anyway, I just wanted to wish everyone a happy Easter. Thank you all for understanding why I had to cancel last week, and also why I had to basically be dipping out of FNT quite a bit this past week. I feel really bad because my wife has hand, foot, and mouth, which has apparently lingered on since my daughter had it 2 weeks ago, so that's not fun for her. And then I had this stomach bug, and luckily we're just getting back to it. And of course, right in time for the work week to begin. And so anyway, thank y'all for that. Now, obviously, a lot of things have indeed happened. Not only do we have a lot of box office news to talk about, we're going to talk about Sinners because, man, oh man, it seems that the simps for some of these films that come out really just have nothing else better to do than to just fill the comment section with nonsense. And as you all know, I don't tolerate that nonsense. So before anyone tries to come up with free speech, it's like, I'm sorry, I've never said that I am a free speech absolutist. And in fact, as a traditional Catholic, I'm actually very much pro-censorship to a certain degree. Anything that causes sin, for instance, I don't think should be allowed in various circumstances. Now, again, who enforces that, etc., that's obviously up for discussion. But yeah, that doesn't work for me. So if you think that that's going to somehow catch me in any way, it's like, no, I never said that that's where I stood on anything. But we'll talk about the Sinners box office because there's some facts that I think people are kind of missing. And as far as why initially the early numbers, though impressive for the movie, and I never took away the fact that it was indeed impressive for the movie, could not make up for its massive budget. And for some reason, people just can't quite understand that. So I'll try to break it down as best I can, and then also explain why its second weekend numbers really showed, right, that there is a huge shift that has happened over the course of the past week that has now pushed the film into a category that most films do not fall into, right? Even my bud, Valiant Renegade, shout out to him, talked about how this is really one of these rare moments. This is not something that you typically see. You don't even see this once a year. This is like once every few years, maybe, if you're lucky, once every 10, probably more accurately, where a film performs in such a way where it has only a 5% drop in its domestic box office from week 1 to week 2. That's right, it's been adjusted, so they did even better than initially anticipated this past weekend. Only a 5% drop from week 1 to week 2. That's insane. In addition to a strong opening weekend, much better than expected, and then to drop that low, right, to have that kind of a hold, is just downright impressive. And there's just no taking away from that. But it does still have a massive budget that it has to make up, and that's the reason why. And any profits that it's going to be making, and right now we could say absolutely that profit is on the table for the film now, after the second weekend numbers, because let's say the second weekend numbers had dropped 40, 50%. Guess what? We would still not be talking about profits. The only reason why profits are even on the table right now is because it had this insane, almost unpredictable hold of 5%, right? Of only a 5% drop from week 1 to week 2. So we'll talk about what the reality is there. try and get through some of the nonsense, try to answer any questions people might have, because there have been a lot of comments in the questions in the comments, I should say. And a lot of the questions, I'm like, bro, I talk about this in the video. If it's not this week's video, it's last week's video. And yet, again, some people just, I guess, one ear and out the other. I guess I should be used to it at this point as a teacher, but hey, that's just how it goes sometimes. We'll also, of course, talk about the big news, of course, last week. And again, a week from today, in fact, back on on Easter Monday, not Holy Monday, but Easter Monday of last week, Pope Francis, the former Holy Father of the Catholic Church, passed away, died. And so we obviously, first, we pray for the repose of his soul. His funeral was this past Saturday, and so we're in this 9-day period where masses are being offered for the Holy Father, where we, I've been bringing this up in my class every day, right, of just praying for the repose of his soul, for all those intentions. But we also, at this point, pray for the upcoming conclave, because there is indeed a conclave coming up. I also, unfortunately, finally watched the film Conclave. Some people have been asking me about that and thought it was something that I should probably watch, because Lord knows the kids these days, they don't actually look up information from verifiable sources or even necessarily know what those are. And so they're more likely to say, oh, well, there's this movie called Conclave, so it must be legit. It must be good. But yeah, obviously there's a lot of things I can say about the film Conclave itself. But since we are now in that 9-day mourning period with the funeral having happened on Saturday, and this morning it was officially announced that May 7th is the start of the conclave. Some people have been kind of asking that initially, and I'll just get that out of the way right now. So it was officially announced today that the conclave will indeed begin May 7th. And so what's going to happen? Who are some of the candidates? All those other things, right? Not your typical stream here on OMB Reviews, but it is obviously a passion of mine as a theology teacher, and as it being a very important part of my life, which is my life of faith. But anyway, that's a lot of stuff to talk about tonight. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the comments before talking about that box office. Before we do, though, make sure you smash that like button, that fire button over on Aussie, smash the rumble button as well. We are live on all 3 platforms tonight, so hopefully everything's coming through okay, and hopefully everything sounds okay. All right, first off, we had General Wingster hanging out in the chat. General Wingster became a Citizen of Asgard member. Appreciate you, good sir. Thank you very much for re-upping at the Citizen of Asgard level. And then went on to say, I want you to stare really hard at my profile picture while explaining how a new pope is elected. Nope, not going to do it, General Wingster. How dare you? We also got Father Luca Illich. What's going on, Father Luca? Always appreciate you have here. One of the chosen of Valhalla and a very awesome supporter. And also one of the priests that follows the channel. So Father Luke is saying here, currently I'm in Loyola. We're on a pilgrimage following the footsteps of St. Ignatius of Loyola, going to pray for y'all in the chapel of Ignatius's conversion. Well, thank you very much, Father Luca. I really do appreciate that. And that's amazing. That'd be really cool. Jesuit education growing up, I've always really loved Jesuit spirituality. It's sad to see the current state of the Jesuits because they have just fallen off so far. There's still some really good Jesuits out there, though. And there's some really good Jesuit schools still out there, too. At the collegiate level, it's like, I don't know of any personally. Just my own personal experience, the one collegiate experience that I have at the Jesuit level was it was unfortunately garbage. And that was even before I became a lot more serious about my faith and became a lot more traditionally minded, actually learning about the traditions and starting to follow them. If I had gone there now at this point, with the knowledge that I have now, oh boy, I don't know if I would have lasted there, because I would have been very vocal about some of the nonsense that was going on there. But anyway, thank you very much, Father Luca, for offering up those prayers, and that's amazing. And Father Luca also, as a priest, he does have some commentary here. He says, concerning the conclave, I'm of the opinion of the late Pope Benedict XVI, and he has a 4-part comment here. This is a quote from Pope Benedict XVI. I would not say so in the sense that the Holy Spirit picks out the Pope. I would say that the Spirit does not exactly take control of the affair, but rather, like a good educator, as it were, leaves us much space, much freedom, without entirely abandoning us. Thus, the Spirit's role should be understood in a much more elastic sense, that he dictates the candidate for whom one must vote. Probably the only assurance he offers is that the thing cannot be totally ruined. Then the German theologian got to the heart of the matter. There are too many contrary instances of popes the Holy Spirit obviously would not have picked. Wish y'all a great stream. Well, Father Luca, thank you very much for those comments. I really appreciate it. Again, thank you for being a long-term member. That was a couple hours ago that he left that comment. So thank you for offering up those prayers. I imagine that you're doing that right now for us. And so I appreciate that. And what I would say is that, people sometimes hear this, right? And this is very false perception, right? We'll go into a lot more details later. But the false perception is that the Holy Spirit picks the Pope. And that's just not at all what the Catholic teaching is. And we unfortunately, even as Catholics, sometimes fall into that problem. And we shouldn't, because there have been bad popes. If the Holy Spirit is actively choosing the Pope in the way that many people present it, it would mean that the Holy Spirit is choosing really bad people to be Pope. This would even include some of the really bad popes from our church's history, right? People think that the current era of popes is bad to a certain degree. It's like, well, look, there were a lot of really bad popes that are still popes, right? We're not even getting into the anti-popes. Like the actual popes themselves on our list, there are some bad people in that list. And yet the church was preserved, right? Even amidst all of that, the church's teachings were preserved. Everything about the church has always been preserved. That is where the Spirit comes in. And even with Pope Francis, and again, we pray for the repose of his soul. There's no denying that there were a lot of issues in the church of today, a lot of it because of some of the things that he had done and the things that he had said, a lot of confusion on his part. But even with all of that, guess what? This past Easter Sunday, this past Easter Vigil, we had some of the biggest numbers that we've seen in a long time of people coming into the church. And it's not necessarily because they're like, oh, Pope Francis is amazing and I want to become a Catholic now because of Pope Francis. If anything, it's actually probably more so because of the way that he taught, the way that he governed. It pushed more and more people closer to tradition. And it's because of so many more people now knowing, loving, and following the traditions of the church that it actually has reached out, that in and of itself has reached out to more people and has brought more people in. And so that just shows you, though, right? Even in the bad, God can work out good. There's nothing that God cannot work good from. So absolutely, Father Luca, thank you very much for those words. And I think Pope Benedict XVI was absolutely on the money there. Because, people wrongly think that the Pope is chosen by the Holy Spirit, and that is not the case. When it comes to the cardinals, they are inspired, meaning that they can, just like any of us, right? But there's a very special type of inspiration that is achieved by a cardinal in conclave, right? There's something very unique about that, picking a pope. But they can either listen to the promptings of the Spirit, just like us, or they cannot listen to the promptings of the Spirit. And that's ultimately going to be up to them. And so my hope is that they do, and that we find a pope that can lead the church. And most importantly, at least for me, can start to bring some clarity. Because our world is so gray at this point. People are just graying the entire moral order. We need clear, crisp, black and white teaching returned, right? It used to be this way. So anyway, more on that later. Snortopupus Cuber, hello, humans and other quitters. What's going on, Snortopupus? Thanks for being here. Thank you also for hanging out last night. Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father. We were on his channel, the Nerd Father, last night, talking a little bit about the conclave there. So for more information or more commentary for me on that matter, if people are more interested in that than they are on the box office stuff, hey, go check that out. I did see some comments here. All right, so Raichu at 737, thank you first off for being a Chosen of Valhalla member. I'm going to shout you out with that right now. Now that I'm starting to feel better, I will try to update the video to include you and your channel's name in the shoutouts for that. But thank you very much for the $2 super chat. Raichu saying, chance of the United States Cardinal elected as Pope. Very, very small, Raichu. I think that you hear a lot of people saying, oh, well, this could be the time because of all the stuff that, Donald Trump is doing, all the stuff the president's doing, and maybe they want someone in there who might have a better chance of negotiating. I don't think a lot of that's based in reality. The thing that even I myself have to be, and this is something everyone has to be careful of, whenever we talk about popes and cardinals and papal politics, we have to remember that the way we perceive things is not how Italy perceives things. It's not how the world perceives things, and it's especially not how the cardinals perceive things, right? I think we wrongly sometimes have this understanding that it's this purely political matter, it's this purely political process. And though I'm not going to deny that there's definitely politicking that happens, right? Because these are human beings, and human beings are imperfect, and human beings are going to fall into that trap. The fact still remains that it doesn't act the same way that we, especially in the United States and in the West, think of, political machinations, right? It just does not work in the same capacity. So people who say something like that, though, where it's like, oh, it's going to be because of what's going on right in the United States that it's more likely. I would say, again, no one really knows for sure, but my gut would say probably not. And I think it's because there is still a very, I think, strong bias against the American church. I mean, if you think about it, up until John Paul II, all of the popes had been Italian for centuries, right? There had not been a non-Italian pope in a long time. John Paul II, obviously, at that point became, and actually going back to the non-Italians, I don't think there had been a non-Italian since the whole actual like conclave process as we know it, since like the 1300s had actually started up. So it just shows you, right, the power of that region. So John Paul II was the first of the non-Italian popes, right? He had been, of course, from Poland. After him, you have Benedict XVI from Germany, and then you have Pope Francis. Now, Pope Francis, he obviously is a bit of a tweener, as we could possibly say, right? An in-betweener there, because he is, his original name, Jorge Bergoglio, right, is very Italian. And so he has clearly had Italian heritage, but he spent a very long time in South America, and so therefore, culturally speaking, is known as the first South American pope, and from Argentina, no less, right? And so there's definitely those things there, right? But there hasn't been an Italian pope in a very long time, and that is a matter that actually will probably be considered by some of the people that are in this conclave. And again, that just shows you, though, out of the entire history of the church, how many have not been in Italy? Not very many. So we're clearly on a trend where, again, all the popes really since John Paul II have been from outside of Italy as far as where they are set up as bishops and as cardinals. But it is, again, something that is not nearly going to be the same as what we are used to when it comes to these types of things. And so I would say a very small chance that it happens. There's obviously always a chance, right? Some of the rumors are that there's Cardinal O'Malley of Boston might have a chance because of certain, again, there's always some reason why. But that's also why there's these groups of cardinals called papabile. And again, more details on that a little bit later. But anyway, you super chatted, so I did want to get to that as soon as possible. So I would say very little chance that actually happens. All right, there was another super chat from Sahil99. Sahil99, thank you very much for the, what was that, the $5 super chat. Appreciate you, man. Saying, I hope you are feeling better. I am, thank you. I love the trailer for The Devil Wears Prada, where they showed a 2-minute scene of the movie. Do you have any favorite trailers? So you mean like the old school trailer for like the actual film? I didn't know if there was a remake or something like that was happening. I was kind of worried. I was like, wait, they're remaking that movie already? In general, though, when it comes to trailers, I think that's like kind of the general question. Any trailers that I enjoy? I personally still really love the Dark Knight's teaser trailer. And the reason why is because it was the very first time we got to hear, just to hear, Heath Ledger's Joker. And it is ingrained itself in my mind because it's that one simple phrase, I'm a man of my word. And like you hear a little bit, just a tiny bit of his laugh. And I remember at that moment, I was just like, oh, he's got this. Because I've been a fan, I had been a fan of Ledger's for a long time. And so when he got cast, I thought, okay, he's going to knock it out of the park. He's going to be great. And a lot of people had a lot of doubts because this is the guy that did A Knight's Tale. This is the guy that did 10 Things I Hate About You. This is the guy that's the heartthrob, right? But I had followed his career and known, oh, no. Like, he has purposefully chosen characters that go against, especially after, 10 Things I Hate About You and A Knight's Tale, that go against what his type is. He did not want to be typecast. And I remember I did a course in college called Stardom. It's actually a pretty cool course because we actually talked about the concept of a star. What does it entail? How does it come about? And for our project, our long-term semester project, we had to do a star study. And of course, I chose Heath Ledger. And so I read a lot about his life and about the choices that he made. And if you really want to see him act against character and against type, there's a very heartbreaking movie called Candy. Some of you might know it, but Heath Ledger's in it. He plays a guy who is in this relationship with a woman. However, they're both in a relationship with drugs. And so it deals with that relationship. And in such a way, and there's a scene especially where he loses someone very close to him, is basically what I'll say. And the emotion on his face, you're just like, oh my goodness, this guy, he's got it. He's got the goods. But I would say that trailer, more so than most others that I can remember, has always stuck with me quite a bit. All right, going back in the chat here. Christoph, the Polish geek. Hello, God bless. When will we exactly know who the next pope will be? We'll talk about that. Don't worry, we'll talk about it. But the conclave itself starts on May 7th. Raichu saying hello. There he is in the live chat. Carl Jacobs, or at least back at 7:04. Carl Jacobs hanging out. Jimmy A, hail to you. Hail Chat and Odin, he says. Jimmy A, thanks for being a member here. RIP to Pope Francis. Absolutely. We pray for the repose of his soul. Thanatos Felicitas. Hello, Odin. Hail to you. Remember, Sci-Fi is a member. Hail to you. Geek True 64 is also a member. Also a great YouTuber as well. For all your physical media questions and needs, check out Geek Truth 64. Again, appreciate you being here. Christoph says, I have cousins in New Orleans. Sadly, haven't been to St. Patrick's, but I've been to St. Louis. Definitely St. Louis Cathedral. St. Louis Cathedral is beautiful. It's in a terrible location, though, because the city of New Orleans itself, the actual city, I can't stand. It's just so disgusting in so many ways. Not just the morals, but even physically, right? It smells. It stinks. St. Louis Cathedral is beautiful. I think St. Patrick's, though, is better. Let's see. Occupant 42 from the Green Machine saying, I had one of those 24-hour bugs last Tuesday. It was nasty. I tried to turn me inside out. Yeah, me too. Luckily, as far as like coming out this end, it only lasted like an hour or less. Once it was out, it was all gone. Made me feel a little bit better at that point. Kimberly G, good evening, Odin, mods in chat. Sorry you're under the weather. Again, feeling a lot better, Kimberly G. Appreciate your kind words. Kiki Rumsky, I'm going to need you to power through this bug like a man. Hey, I will if I can. There's some things that you just can't power through. Yeah, Raichu, Conclave begins next week, again, next Wednesday. Jimmy A, Sinners reminds me of Get Out when it was out. Both are horror movies aimed towards black audiences coming out when racial tension is high in America, plus both were good word of mouth. It's a very good comparison, and there is an article we'll look at that actually does also make that connection. It's also one that someone tried to make an argument as far as, why did you say this is bad, but then this movie did this and it was good? It's like, well, you kind of answered your own question by the fact that they were two completely different movies, and therefore the trajectories are not looking like they're going to be the exact same. But luckily the article mentions it. Bruce hanging out. The R, excited because it's kind of like a throwback to the OMB report a little bit. Let's see. Thanos Lisa saying, I would rather watch The Shoes of the Fisherman, 1968 from Anthony Quinn. Always play a priest that becomes the Pope. Father Christopher Miller, hail to him. He speaks very highly of most of the film. He says the end gets a little bit too 60s, a little bit too of its time. But he showed us a little bit of the clip from the conclave scene in that, and that's something that definitely makes me interested in checking out sooner. Rob D saying, hello, Odin. Are people still roasting you on your Sinners box office coverage? Of course. Because, again, it's one thing if there's constructive criticism. It's one thing if there is something that's worth, like, mentioning. But the people that are in the comment section are not doing that, right? They're just going out of their way to be jerks. And it's like, look, it's not that I have thin skin. It's just that I don't want to deal with that. It's just, it doesn't help my soul. It doesn't help the person who's doing its soul. And so why would I allow it? That's where I stand. Jimmy A, it might sound like a conspiracy theory, but is it possible the filmmakers of Conclave knew the Pope didn't have long left, so they made the movie to mislead people? No, I mean, because he's been he had been towards the end of his life for a couple of years, right? Because he has not been in the best health, especially when you think about, when he died on Easter Monday after having been in the hospital for so long. And remember, all the rumors were coming out when he was in the hospital. They're like, oh, he's only got 72 hours left to live. Turns out that wasn't anywhere close to being true. And then he ends up dying of a stroke. People don't talk about that one as much, right? He died of a stroke, and it was a stroke that then led to a coma, which then led to a heart attack. So sounds a very painful way to die. And that's why we should pray for him. But yeah, it's a bit too conspiratorial in that instance, obviously, and I think there's a little bit of joking in that. But I think it's more of they had an idea that the Pope probably didn't have very long left, and so they thought, hey, this is a great time to adapt it, because even if it happens a year from now, the movie will still be relevant to them. And so I think you could argue it was done because things were not looking like they would last much longer. That's probably part of the motivation as to why they started it when they did. But yeah, as far as like the exact moment, yeah. Christoph saying, I think media frequently pulled Pope Francis' words out of context. He never said all religions lead to God. He said all religions seek God, but only Jesus obviously leads to him. I'm going to push back a little bit on that, only because he did sign a document on behalf of the church that did say God willed all religions. And that is a very big thing, right? Because to say that God actively willed all religions means, again, from the church's view, he wills by his direct will, by his active will, the false religions. And that is a problem. And people could explain it very easily, right? But the problem is that he never explained it. The Vatican never really came out to explain it either. It was people on behalf of him, armchair theologian types on YouTube and channels and things like that, who had to explain it. And I think that was a big problem. That's why I think that one of the biggest things that we probably need going forward is someone who's just much more of a straight shooter, doesn't mince words when it comes to just very clear church teaching. I think that's a big thing. Justin C., hail and happy Easter to you as well. King and Rumsky, rough question. What are your thoughts when it comes to Pope Francis' infallibility with respect to the church's teaching? So remember, that also requires us to talk about Pope Francis's and what it actually means to be infallible. Infallible, right, and the infallibility of the Pope is specific to issues of faith and morals, but also things that fall in line with the tradition of the church. The Pope can't just come out of nowhere and make up a teaching, right? There's a false perception out there. So, for instance, the defining of the Immaculate Conception of Mary, right? That Mary was conceived herself without the stain of original sin, that she was assumed body and soul into heaven. These weren't just random things that those popes came up with. These have been things that have been in the tradition of the church since the very beginning, since the earliest centuries of the church. And so it's this understanding that they are defining something that was always implicitly understood, and what they've done is make it explicit. They've made explicit the things that were implicit. Some of the things that Pope Francis did were not doing those things. Like, for instance, the death penalty. That, to me, because people usually ask, sometimes even students ask, right, what is the thing that I think might have been like the biggest problem? I think his attempt to, it can only be said to be an attempt to change the church's teaching on the death penalty is a big problem. That's why even some of the most prominent theologians, even people that might even agree with his general sentiment, said, whoa, wait, hold on. The church for its entire history has always said this when it comes to the death penalty, and now all of a sudden we're saying the exact opposite. That indicates a change, and church's moral teachings cannot actually change. It's part of the nature of the church for that not to be the case. So, yeah, I think that that's something that a future pope's going to have to deal with. A future council probably even more appropriately would have to deal with. But we'll have to see. Again, that's what's going to be interesting to see, who becomes the next pope and what their initial actions are. Because there's some papabile, there's some people that are papal, there's some people that are potential papal candidates who might actually be of the mindset that they want to reverse a lot of the stuff that has been put forward because of the confusion. But as far as the other things, right, his infallibility is only exists within, again, that very limited framework. People often don't really think about it that much. Jeremy Zakowski, evening, Odin, everyone. I'm a little bit late, but I'm here. I think I'm here. Yes, you are, Jeremy Zakowski. Christoph, the Polish Geek. What do you think of John Paul II? He is my favorite pope of my lifetime. As far as of my lifetime, Pope Benedict XVI is, theologically speaking, I just think he is the most. Reading his encyclicals always makes me happy because they are easy to understand. He speaks as a theologian, not as a philosopher. That's where John Paul II loses me a little bit because he's a little bit too philosophical. It's, again, not anything bad necessarily. I do think, though, that when it comes to both of them, Pope Francis is a part of this too, there is a big stain on their record, though, when it comes to the abuse crisis. We can't ignore that. We can't ignore that elephant in the room. And the fact is that there are clear indications that things were known by these people. And the questions have to be asked of what do they know, when did they know it, and why wasn't more done? And again, we have to ask those questions. Some people, I think, wrongly put certain motivations to the people, and we really just can't do that, right? We need to have the full context, the full information available to us before we can make those kinds of claims, or at least to go in that direction with it. But again, it's something I think a future pope does need to also bring up. It's also why I think it's a mistake to try to canonize people so quickly these days. The fact that if you look to the history of the church and the history of canonizations, so few popes were canonized. And then you get to the 1950s, those popes onward, and every single pope has been either canonized or beatified, with the exception of Pope Francis and Benedict XVI. Even John Paul I, I believe, was beatified, if not declared venerable. So the fact that that's the kind of the direction that we've been going in, that's already a bit of a problem, honestly. Let's see, Cthulhu. Thanks for remembering on the channel, Cthulhu. Glad to have you back. Saying, happy Monday. Wish you all well. We all know that the Pope will never be South American, so just a matter of how close they live to Italy to figure out who is picked. Well, they did have a South American, actually, because Pope Francis was from Argentina, or at least, again, Culturally Italian, but there's definitely some Argentinian, South American roots there. It'd be interesting to see whether or not we get our first African pope in a long time, because we have had African popes before. People don't realize this, but yes, we have had African popes. It's just been a very long time. All right, we got Laura hanging out in the chat as well. I think I finally have caught up with where the chat is, where I had to like have two windows open. So let me just double check just to make sure. Just to make sure. Yes, there's Laura's. All right, Arnold Hay saying, happy late Easter. How did you spend yours? I noticed you didn't go live last Monday. I already addressed that. Scott McKenzie, citizen of Asgard. Appreciate you for being a member for 34 months in a row. You're a legend, bruh. Laura saying, happy that Revenge of the Sith did great at the box office, but tickets were $35 here. Yeah, that's another thing that needs to be kind of caught in mind is, yes, it did well. Yes, a lot of people went to go see, but the tickets were also very expensive. And to my knowledge, the only extra thing you got was that you have maybe a little bit of an introduction by Hayden Christensen. I know I saw that. I don't know if there was anything else that was a part of that fan experience or not. $35 is a bit insane. I'm going to be honest there. Scott McKenzie saying, greetings, y'all. Greetings to you. Appreciate it. Still 15 minutes behind in the chat. King and Rumsky. In the end, the Holy Spirit guides you to the answer, but our free will allows us to choose something else. Very good. That's a great way of putting it. Grapthar's Hammer, hail to you. Caveat Ties, hail to you. Arnold, hey, are you surprised how well Revenge of the Sith did at the box office, coming in number 2? I'm not surprised that it did well. I am surprised that it did that well. And again, it's one of those things where it's like I am and I'm not, because I knew going into the weekend there was a lot of excitement behind it. Even a lot of my students, like there's students of mine that are huge fans of the prequels, more so for the lulz and for the memes, but still fans of it nonetheless. And they had a lot of fun in their theater and quoting the film, with everything, right? They had a full pack theater for that. Carl Jacobs, thanks for being a member at the Citizen of Asgard level. Appreciate you for becoming a member once again. Let's see. Born in Argentina, parents Italian. Exactly, Grapthar's Hammer. But culturally, that's where that comes in. Laura saying, and the $35 wasn't for premium theater either. Yeah, that just is a bit crazy. Arnold, hey, I have never seen a movie like Sinners drop 6% during second weekend. This is so rare. Do you recall another film that did that smaller drop? Not of recent memory. There was, I think, one that may have done it the last 2 years, but it's very, very uncommon. And thank you for mentioning that. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're just going to jump over to talking about the box office there. So that way we can get a little bit more conversation going on the papal stuff, because I know it interests a lot of people. There's a lot of Catholics, non-Catholics alike that are very intrigued by the process, that either know some stuff, don't know some stuff, want to learn some stuff, are intrigued at least by some stuff. But let's do some box office talk. And so if we're going to talk about box office, we're going to do a little bit of calculations. You know, there's one thing that we always have to remind people of.
Time to see a real mathematician at work!
That's right, it's time to do some math. Time to see a real math magician at work. And so, yes, indeed, Sinners dropped, and actually, a little bit of correction there, it's been adjusted now that the movie Sinners dropped only 5% from last weekend, bringing its total domestic to $123 million after only 2 weeks of release. Now, it was also mentioned about how well Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, the re-release, the 20th anniversary edition, did at the box office, $25.4 million. And yes, indeed, with those adjustments, it is still that number 2 spot, beating the brand new film, The Accountant 2. Now, The Accountant 2 is a sequel, and so therefore it does have that sequel-esque nature to it. But still, Revenge of the Sith, a film that came out 20 years ago, getting number 2 at the box office, is always an impressive thing to see. Also must be stated that those ticket prices were very, very high, and that explains why it did as well as it did. If it had been a normal ticket price, it wouldn't have gotten this high at the box office. Again, that's just using basic math there, right? Because, okay, you have the same amount of people going to see it. It's costing a third of what it's supposed to cost. Okay, you're not going to make nearly as much, but still very impressive nonetheless for that film. But let's talk about Sinners, because that's really where our focal point is, okay? So at a 5% drop. So let's look at the worldwide totals, okay? So first, $163 million what the film has made so far. This film is primarily a domestic box office hit. This movie is not doing the same types of numbers, and it's not likely to in the internationals. And remember, when it comes to horror films in general, especially American horror films, do not do really as well internationally. That's just not the market for those kinds of movies. People go see them, obviously. It's still making $40 million there after 2 weeks. That's still very good for a horror film, right? But it's just not a place, not a market that you really see a lot of movement with. The first thing I will point out, though, other than the worldwide budget, worldwide box office, and the fact that it's, international numbers have not been all that great. Again, that's just because, again, when I say all that, people are already going to be like, oh, you said it wasn't great, I'm going to attack you, because that's basically what every comment has been in my box office breakdowns from the past couple weeks, okay? So when you look at these internationals, on paper compared to any other kind of movie, it's not that impressive. You compare this to a generic action film, to a generic comedy film or anything like that, international for horror films just don't do nearly as well. This is doing really well for the kind of movie that it is, but again, that's just giving praise, but also at the same time being realistic too. The other thing, though, the main thing I wanted to point out is some people are a little miffed about why am I charting. I'm reporting that the production budget was $95 million. Now, here's the thing. Yes, thenumbers.com says $90 million. Thenumbers.com also has a lot of other films on here with budgets that are actually incorrect, either because of a clerical error or because numbers have been adjusted over time, okay? When I've done the research on the movie, right, even over on the amazingly unbiased platform that is IndieWire, even they are reporting around a $90 million production budget. The issue is that there are other reports that the movie initially cost $90 million, but actually ended up costing a little bit more after the fact. And because of that, because there are other reports out there that exist, just like I do with any movie, not just this one, but any film, if the movie has a budget span, I typically in my charting will put the average of them. I look and see, okay, what are the sources of information on these numbers that are being reported, and is it something that is enough for me to think, okay, there could be something to the film costing a bit more than what had been anticipated, okay? In my initial research, that's exactly what I found, and therefore, $95 million is what is currently in my charting. It could very well have cost only $90 million. But again, until we have much better confirmation on that, normally that doesn't happen until tax returns come out, that kind of thing, right? We're still in the very early stages of this movie, right? $90 million definitely sounds about right, but hey, $95 to $100 million also sounds like that's a possibility too. So that's why my charting has $95 million. I've done this for other films. If you've been around for any length of time, you know, right? I sometimes have numbers like that in my charting. Now, that's the first thing, because people have been just going gaga over that. Just been like, oh, how dare you have it listed at this amount? Even if it was $90 million, the film has still made 1.8 times its budget. Remember, in today's world, you usually need to make now 3 times your budget to break even. Now, the range that I have in my chart is actually a bit more generous with that, because it used to be, back in the day, before COVID especially, that it was around 2.5 times your budget. That was usually a pretty good indicator of what your break-even point was. But now, in today's world, it's usually that range of somewhere between 2.5 and 3 times the budget. Now, will that film get to 2.5 times its budget? At this rate, absolutely. If after 2 weeks you're at 1.8 times your budget, you're on a very good track to be able to hit that mark. Now, will you much more easily hit 3 times your budget? That's still a question mark. Now, based on where it's tracking and how much better it's doing compared to what the projections have been, I would say 3 times the budget should not be a problem for this movie. But it is still something that we just do not know at this point, because we have to actually wait for those numbers to officially be released. Okay, so that's one thing right there about the budget. People have been freaking out. The other thing people don't quite understand are how break-even points go, okay? Now, even IndieWire, right? Even the very unbiased IndieWire, which seemed to be pretty much praising a film like Sinners, guess what? Even they admit, guess what? The film needs to make quite a bit of money to break even, okay? According to them, they talk about these numbers. And again, I disagree with them somewhat here, but if even they are going to have a similar assumption that I do, as far as its total costs are concerned, okay, we're probably on a pretty same page here, right? So it says here, if we were to assume, using the usual math, 90 million production budget, again, they have it at 90 million, I have mine at 95. That does not make that much of a difference in the math here, okay? It really doesn't. Plus $45 million in marketing, I have mine set to be 1.5 times the budget, which means it's just about at $45 million. Again, because I have mine at 95, it's probably at like $47.5 million, but hey, still about the same. Would mean that Sinners needs to earn, as it says here, $135 million to break even. Now, at first, I was going to go crazy on them saying, oh, how dare you? That's not how the math works, okay? Because just because you cost X amount of money, $135 million to make the movie, does not mean that that's all you need to make at the box office. But luckily, I kept reading, and luckily, they told us for, how it actually goes. It says here, consider that for any movie, theaters traditionally take half of what a film earns at the box office. Again, the share varies for each movie. That means Sinners has to make at the box office twice the break-even number. And again, there's disagreement over that somewhat. In this case, that's $270 million worldwide. Well, hey, wait a minute. What's my break-even point? They have it at 270. Oh, wait a minute. Mine's at 237 to 285. That's just about in that ballpark. Now, it does say, hey, profitable there. Warner Brothers is going to have its own internal numbers. They have a better idea of how much money they're getting back and all those other things. Okay, we get that. But even a site like IndieWire is going to have the same argument that I'm having, which is that, okay, it still has to make a lot of money to actually break even. Now, after last weekend, guess what? After last weekend, even though it was impressive for an opening weekend, right? We go back to those opening numbers there, right? $63 million. That's impressive for a rated R horror film like that, okay? But at a $90 to $100 million budget, that's still not enough for an opening weekend. This is the thing that people just can't quite understand. For an opening weekend, that is not enough, okay? Because, as I mentioned last weekend, on average, people don't listen to my words apparently, on average, films tend to make about a third of their entire box office in their opening weekend. So assuming an average run, my words, assuming an average run of the box office, that would have put the film at only around $180 to $200 million. Now, if even IndieWire says 270 as a break even, okay, average run from that opening weekend number as that starting point, guess what? That's a flop based on those numbers alone. And that's all the numbers that we had working for us. Now, over the course of the week, it did very well. And then the weekend, of course, only a 5% drop. That's why the story has now changed. That's why the projections have now changed. Because now we have a new number to work with, 161, right, for the end of its second weekend numbers. And therefore, because of that, and this is why I always say, I don't make firm projections on anything until we get at least the first 2 weeks. And again, people say, well, if you say that, why do you say it was a flop? Because again, on average, films of that type of opening weekend flop. And on average, in fact, more than average, most films these days don't do better than the average. That's just the case of the box office these days, right? Rated R horror films, even the ones that do really, really well, still typically struggle if they have a higher budget. Especially one that's close to $100 million worth, which is almost unheard of, right? We're in very really unwalked territory in many ways. $161 million for 2 weeks, though, that means guess what? Your your total box office, again, these are averages still. So a best case scenario for your typical average run would put the film around $323 million, which is more than enough to make up for your break-even point if you're at a $90 million budget or $95 million budget, right? Even a $100 million budget, you're actually making that money back too. But it still has a ways to go at this point. It still has not gotten to that point, and we don't know what next week is going to be like. For all we know, the third weekend could have a massive drop. I doubt it. I highly doubt it. If you have a 5% drop week 2, you're probably going to have a drop in the teens, maybe. I mean, again, we don't know exactly. This is kind of unprecedented territory in many ways because this is the only film that I can really remember of its genre, of its kind, of its type, an original rated R movie. Again, these typically don't perform this way. But that's why now my projections have it as either a very small loss, and again, these numbers here are 2.5, which means the actual 3 times factor would be closer to 10 million in losses or up to around $40 million in gains. And again, the fact that it's even at that point is really impressive because last weekend, the numbers that were there indicated the film was going to lose around $50 to $100 million. That would have been really bad, right? It would have been very hard to make that up on VOD. And again, you could have made that up on VOD, and people were trying to argue that point. And again, if you have the numbers in front of you to show that, hey, I am more than willing to listen to that. But it's still a pretty deep hole if that was the case. That's not the case anymore, right? Now, at only a $10 million loss in a worst-case scenario and up to a $40 million loss in a best-case scenario on the average run, yeah, you're looking at good stuff here. Now, again, this film might actually do better than the average. Right now, it seems to be tracking that way, which means it will probably make maybe over that $50 to $100 million net profits. That's really, really good because then you have to add in VOD sales, which are already looking like they're going to be pretty good. Any Blu-ray 4K sales probably also be pretty good there too. So you're looking at a film that's going to make a pretty decent amount of profit. But that does not take away the fact that the film's budget is going to hold the film back still, even in that best case scenario. If this film continues to lag out, if this film's end up able to do something to, another rated R film that was just mentioned, right, of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, well, guess what, right? That would be a very interesting situation, right? Now, it goes on here to mention that very film. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood opened to only $41 million, but legged out to $392 million worldwide. But here's the thing. Of note, that film made almost 2/3 of its haul internationally. That's not happening, and that will not happen for Sinners, because Sinners as a horror film is going to be predominantly domestic. So it's to be interesting to see that domestic battle between Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and Sinners. It'd be very interesting to see that battle. Internationally, though, it's not going to be close because of the kind of movie that it is. Because your budget and your genre can oftentimes either make or break you, and can also determine whether or not your film is as profitable as someone might otherwise indicate. So hopefully that helps to break down the whole nonsense surrounding the Sinner stuff, right? Why the film is doing well, why the film is on track to make money, but also why it's not on track to make a heck of a lot of net profits. All right, we're talking net profits, net gains here, okay? Again, for the kind of movie that it is, the fact that they really handicapped it in a lot of ways by spending so much money on it, it's impressive to see that. But let's talk about profits here, okay? A Minecraft movie is already $154 million in net profits, okay? So let's look at some other ones. Moana 2, $240 million in net profits. Net profits, okay, that's huge numbers there. Now, for its budget, that net profit for Sinners is still going to be really good. Even at $50 to $100 million for a radar film, that would, again, overall, or rather for a radar film of its budget, that would be impressive. And the budget really, I think, is going to be the story of this movie, because think about how much more net profits the film could have made had they actually had a sensible amount of control over how much they spent on that movie. I haven't seen the film yet, but it's hard for me to figure out exactly how they spent that much money on a film of that genre. Anyway, let's dive back into the comments here. I imagine a lot of the comments from 747 and earlier might be a little bit more focused on theology, and so we'll dive into those discussions as we move over the course of this. All right, let's see. We got Scott McKenzie saying Francis's dad was Italian, his mom was Italian descent. Yeah, as I mentioned. Strobus Cuber saying Pope Adrian VI from 1522 to 1523 was Dutch. He was the last non-Italian pope before Pope John Paul II. Thank you for that historical fact. Appreciate that. Freaky deaky Dutch. I figured he was from around that time. Jimmy A. One of the best trailers of my lifetime was Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. It pumped me up before Maverick, and it frustrated me when the theaters didn't show the trailer more. Oh, nice. Christoph, the Polish Geek, saying, great Catholic movie is The Passion of Joan of Arc. You mean like the old school silent film? I've actually never seen that one. Raichu, remember, it was great watching episode 3 in the theaters again. Nice. Glad that you had a good time. Looks like a lot of people enjoyed it. Gary Banjo Sandwich Worthington, hail to you. More bugs than a bug's life. Interesting. He goes on to say, hi, and bring on the Conclave. There it is. Geek True 64. As a non-Catholic, I still like hearing you talk about Catholicism. Well, I appreciate that, Geek True 64. It's a very interesting, it is a very interesting history. Hardwick, what do you think of Sinners as a movie? I have not seen it yet, Hardwick. That's the other thing, too. People are like, have you seen it yet? It's like, if I had seen it, I would have said I had seen it. Cthulhu, behind by a couple of minutes, as I am too. This is 8 p.m. The comment came in, and it's 8:18. Almost 20 minutes behind here. Are you suggesting Trump for Pope? Never. Nope. Christoph, the Polish Geek, I think issues you meant about recent popes is more of an issue of Vatican II. So here's the thing, Christoph, though. They're very much tied together, okay? Because a lot of the things that have been implemented since Vatican II are because of the more recent popes. So that's another issue that I think needs to be addressed. I think that there needs to be an honest discussion about some of the documents, some of the wording of the documents, because a lot of that ambiguous stuff that Pope Francis was notorious for really started in a very real way with Vatican II, because some of those documents are, again, a bit on the ambiguous side. And so I think having, if not a council, at the very least a pope who will write a document saying, all right, let's clear up some of the stuff that has questions about it. It'd be a good thing to see, I think. Jimmy A. I would recommend The Accountant too. Ben Affleck and John Berthal are great together. The actions are great. The movie has an anti-human trafficking message, anti-human trafficking / gang message. Yeah, I've heard great things about it. It's definitely on my radar for sure. Christoph, do you think Vatican III would be necessary? I don't know if Vatican III, because here's the thing. We could have a non-Vatican council, right? But does an ecumenical council need to happen? I think it does. There's a caveat with that, though, right? With the current state of the hierarchy of the church, right? I think a lot needs to be done to really pick up. Like, I think that a lot needs to be done to clean out and clean up the hierarchy before a council can be called for. I think that a pope needs to come in, and it's going to sound harsh, but I think the pope needs to come in and excommunicate a bunch of people. Starting off with the hierarchs, starting off with the cardinals, starting off with the bishops. I think there are people that just need to straight up be excommunicated. Or at the very least need to be censured or some type of canonical penalty, because there's some people who are pushing forward things that are the very antithesis of church's teachings, right? That's what we really need, right? And I hate it as a show, right? Because of a lot of just crap they put in it. But shows like the new pope, the young pope, right? One of the things that I do appreciate from the show is the way in which the pope at the time who's elected, and man, is he a Pius the 13th? I forget I haven't watched that show in so long, because it really just, again, there's some stuff in there that's like, nope, no thank you. Goes a bit too far in certain areas. But this very young pope is elected, and he's a very traditional pope. And he starts just like tearing things up, basically, but in a good way, or at least what many traditionally minded Catholics would look at as being kind of a good thing. So his clips often circulate around social media because you're like, oh man, wouldn't it be amazing if we had a prelate that actually spoke this way? But we really kind of need something like that, unfortunately, right? And I hate to use that as an example, but we really need someone to clean things up. Once the hierarchy is cleaned up, then I think an ecumenical council would be absolutely needed to clear things up and to make, basically to get the whole Spirit of Vatican II stuff completely wiped out, if not at the very least corrected. Because the Spirit of Vatican II, we all know, did not really line up with necessarily the text of Vatican II. Carl Jacobs, how do I get access to my OMB perks? Half off admission price, free popcorn, invitations to exclusive Disney premieres. Oh, if only I could offer all those things. Gary Badger Sandwich Worthy, hashtag Math Magician. Absolutely. Christoph. By the way, that's personal, but I visited the United States recently to see friends, and I burned a bridge with my close friend, Melissa. It was admittedly my fault, but please pray for us both. Hope it heals. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We'll pray for y'all. That's the stuff. Always enjoys the box office. Justin C. Curious to see how Thunderbolts is currently tracking opening weekend-wise. Well, since you mentioned it, I will look that up real quick. I don't know if there has been an update to Box Office Theory's tracking. By the way, Box Office Theory is great. They do 5-week tracking on films, and it is looking like, let's see. Oh, man, I almost forgot that Thunderbolts comes out this weekend. Oh, my goodness. I have to watch Thunderbolts this week. It's my homework for FNT, I know. No, I don't want to watch it. Anyway, right now tracking 67 to 82 million as of the last update. That's domestic opening weekend. 67 to 82. Total domestic 155 to 246. So looking like it's going to be about what Captain America Brave New World did. That film capped at around 400-ish million. That's usually not enough for the types of budgets that these films have. I haven't looked at the budget for that film recently, but I want to say it's around $200 million. And if it's not been reported, it wouldn't surprise me if that ends up being the total. J.S. Pena, saw Count at 2 on Saturday, thought it was good, but the bad guy isn't all that memorable. There it is. For Sci-Fi, the Ace Ventura and Small Soldiers 4K Steelbooks look really good. Ooh, there's an Ace Ventura Steelbook? I hope it has both movies. That's the kind of films that really both films should be on the same set. I don't know if I'd want to spend the amount of money on two separate steelbooks on the Ace Ventura films. I love those movies, but yeah, right now there's actually a giveaway on the Discord for Keeper of the Bifrost members and above for this thing. So this is Shaun of the Dead Steelbook. I love the cover art on this, and apparently it's no longer available on Amazon. So anyway, this thing is currently the giveaway right now. Eventually, I'll then have the giveaway on the Discord server for the Drive 4K Steelbook. I do like the artwork on that one. And I did just give away the amazing... Let's see. I gave this one away over on the Discord. And look, I know Flight Risk is not a great film. Okay? It's not. Mel Gibson directed it. And honestly, this is Mel Gibson. He's starting The Passion of the Christ 2 this summer. Filming starting up very soon, and I think he did this film so that he could get kind of back in the routine of directing again. And so I wasn't really expecting much, and it's not really one of the best things that he's ever done by a long shot. But this Steelbook is the best thing. The marketing team behind this film deserves like 10 out of 10 because this is how you make a Steelbook for this, okay? Because what did everyone talk about when that trailer came out for Flight Risk? Whoa, what's going on with Marky Mark's hair, right? Well, again, this Steelbook is you remove the hat and he's bald. So anyway, that has recently been given away. It might be my favorite Steelbook of the year. Geek True 64, I'd love your thoughts on that. I think it has the ability to be a top contender for best Steelbook of the year. For just the thought of it alone. Geek True 64 saying, Greed got that Small Soldier Steelbook on pre-order already. Nice. I might have to check that out. Christoph, I noticed anytime someone asks about box office, you tend to speak for 20 minutes about it and all details. You must be passionate about it. I love box office. Yes. I love it. I love it. I love it. Forever Sci-Fi, do the Gelgamic Catholics get a vote? I don't actually know a whole lot about the Gelgamic Catholics. It's all of the cardinals. So the way that a conclave works, just a general explanation first, is the current law, the current church law, canon law, states that any cardinal, so that's obviously a very specific group of people, any cardinal who is 79 years of age or younger is eligible to vote for the next pope. That means anyone who's 80 years old or older as of the day the pope has died is not eligible to vote. Now, you can still become pope even if you're 80. The difference and the reason why you're probably not going to be elected pope is because if you're 80 or older, you cannot be in the physical conclave when it happens. So again, the conclave, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the show, is starting on May 7th. So May 7th is the start date. And the way it goes is that on that first day, on May 7th, there's going to be one vote. So this is the current canon law, right? There'll be one vote on the first day, and that's May 7th. The chances of a pope being elected on the first day are not likely because that is when the first time the cardinals go into the Sistine Chapel, put their votes in all anonymously, right? All secretly, and then the votes are tallied. It's a way for them to basically see where does everyone stand. So you're probably going to have that first vote have 20 votes here, 15 votes there, 10 votes there, right? And you'll get an idea, though, of who are the ones that have the highest votes and who are the ones that are really, again, only they can really know, the papabile, right? The ones that are most likely to be pope. Now, right now, since the conclave has not yet started, we do have a group of cardinals, about 20 or so, that are considered, quote, papabile. What that means is that they have a position right now either in the Vatican or in the church that makes them a bit more prominent. They have a bit more of a profile. And that profile matters because, especially with a conclave like this, with around 135 voting members, and I think only 133, 134 are going to actually be there to vote. One I know of is not going to be able to go because of health reasons. Another, his voting rights were taken away because of a scandal that he is embroiled in financially. And so that's going to impact those numbers. But in general, these cardinals have not actually been together until the Pope has died, right? The Pope died on Monday, last Monday. And we still, again, I always going to say it, we pray for the repose of his soul. And the cardinals had not met as a group, as an entire group, since 2015. So they don't really know each other that well. They haven't really spent a lot of time with each other. And so a lot of them, they're meeting each other for the first time in the meetings, right? The day after he died, there were meetings that started in the Vatican amongst the cardinals to basically just determine, okay, what's our timeline looking like on the funeral? What's the timeline looking like on the conclave? What are some of the ideas and some of the things that are going to be brought up at the conclave? Like, it's getting those initial things started, right? Those initial meetings getting started there. And so all that stuff is happening. And this is also their ability for the first time really to start to get to know one another. So having that higher profile then means, okay, even if they have not met and gotten to know each other, they're going to be some names that they're going to all recognize. No matter where they were in the world, no matter whether they were the cardinal in Sri Lanka that's there, whether they were the cardinal in the Middle East that was there, right, they're going to have heard of some of the cardinals because of what they have done, either because of where they sit in the Vatican. So, for instance, there's a Cardinal Parolin, right, who is the Secretary of State, which is basically the next highest position next to Pope. Right, they're a very prominent role. So Cardinal Parolin is kind of a diplomat in many ways, right? Kind of like a politician in a certain light. Church politics, though. So a lot of people are going to know him because he would have been kind of the right-hand man of Pope Francis in many ways. He would have been responsible for a lot of the documents, right, that were signed off by Pope Francis, but he was kind of put in charge of in certain ways. So basically, the Secretary of State is a very powerful position, and so people are going to know him. So he's Papabile for that very reason alone, because he's very well known. You also have other people, though, like one of my favorites because of his name alone, not to mention he seems like a very genuinely good guy, and that's Cardinal Pizzaballa. So Cardinal Pizzaballa, he's Italian, but he has been in the Holy Land for about 30 years, and he has been a cardinal there, and one of the unique things about him, and he's one that a lot of people know about, is, for one, he has not taken any one side, really, on the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which I think is a good thing, because he's basically calling out the atrocities no matter who it is. And atrocities can be called out no matter what. But also, on behalf of the Israelis, he offered himself as a trade. He offered himself to the Palestinians. He offered himself to Hamas as a trade, saying, please return the Israeli hostages and you can have me, basically. So the fact that this dude offered himself, right, as a sacrifice in a way, right, as a trade for these people, obviously they didn't take him up on it, but the fact that he was even willing to do that was just very impressive, at least to me, right? But that puts him obviously in the attention of a lot of people. But even before then, he was the one actually, as Patriarch of Jerusalem, he was actually elected to be in charge of the holy sites. So he's actually known as an administrator because he had to basically look over the holy sites to ensure people's access to the holy sites, that the holy sites were being kept up well, that the church is there, like anything that the Catholic Church had some ownership or some stake in, he was responsible for making sure that everything was being kept up with. And again, that takes a very that takes an administrator. And guess what? That's a quality that a lot of people think, hey, do we need an administrator to be a good administrator to be our next pope? That might be something. Papabile, right? Because of his position. So kind of just a very basic on the surface level of why certain cardinals are considered Papabile and why others aren't. It's because they either have a position in the Vatican and so they're well known, a la someone like a Cardinal Parolin, a Secretary of State, or because they have other positions in the church or other positions on behalf of the church, a la a Cardinal Pizzaballa, who had to be the one in charge essentially of these holy sites and showed himself to be a very good administrator to the point where he got reelected to that position several times over, which is not necessarily something that happens all the time. It shows that there's a lot of confidence in his ability to run those sites and to take on that work. He's also, I believe, a Franciscan, and so if he were elected to be the Pope, he'd be the first Franciscan Pope, I think. But someone can correct me on that. King Ramsky says, Trump as a Pope would be huge. Yeah, no. Nope. Not to mention, he is not a practicing Catholic, and so he's actually ineligible. Father Christopher Miller. Hail to you, Father. Father Miller. We were talking last night. I hope that everything went well after. All right, you. Everyone's saying hello to Father Miller. Let's see. Christoph 824 saying, what was the spirit and what was the text? Which one was more traditionally in line with church teaching? The text for sure. So, yeah, for those that don't know, the Second Vatican Council, which we often just call Vatican II, issued several documents. They're called dogmatic constitutions, pastoral constitutions, different documents that dealt with different things. There were several documents, though, that dealt with certain issues and used language that seemed to indicate, or at the very least was open to be interpreted in a very wish-washy way. So, for instance, one of the most famous lines, I think it's in Gaudium et Spes, but again, correct me if I'm wrong here. And I say all this in charity to be corrected. And that is, it said the line that the truth subsists in the Catholic Church. So the traditional teaching of the church has always been, right, that the Catholic Church is the only path to salvation, right? Outside of the church, the way the teaching has always gone is outside of the church, outside the Catholic Church, there is no salvation. This all stems from the fact that Christ says, in Scripture, and we see it mentioned several times that, I am the way, the truth, and the life. There's no salvation except through me. I am that path. I am that way. What did Christ establish? The church. Whose church was it? The Catholic Church. That's the reason why the Catholic Church, again, has that understanding. So again, even if you disagree with that, that's the mindset as far as why the church believes that and why the church holds that position. But anyway, that's always been the consistent traditional teaching of the church. And then in the document, all of a sudden, it now says the truth subsists in. Now, again, if you talk to the people who wrote the documents and people that will defend it, they'll say, yeah, subsist is just another word in English for how we mention and talk about how it exists within, right? But when anyone in the English language hears subsist, we think, okay, it seems to leave open the possibility that there is truth elsewhere outside of this, right? And that's, again, a bit of ambiguity creeping in, or at the very least, the ability for one to easily interpret it in an ambiguous way. It creates some problems there. So that's just one example. And the Spirit of Vatican II is basically what happened after the council. So, for instance, there were changes made. Sacrosanctum Concilium was the document on the liturgy, and it made some recommendations, right? However, in the midst of those recommendations, especially as they were awaiting for a group, basically this group that was brought together by the Pope Paul VI to revise the liturgy, as they were waiting for this concilium, as it was known as, to revise the liturgy, people started doing a lot of really crazy things with the liturgy. Things that in previous times would have gotten them excommunicated, previous things that really were just inappropriate for the Mass, and still are inappropriate for the Mass as well. And once the actual concilium came out with the new rubrics, with the new instructions, guess what? The same exact thing happened. People just started running, crazy all over the place with their own interpretations of how the Mass should be. This is where the communion tables get brought in. In many ways, it was actually very reminiscent of the Protestant Revolt, of the Protestant Reformation, where altars were torn out of churches and replaced with simple tables, right? A very, violent action, and also one that clearly makes a statement. A lot of that happened after Vatican II as well. And again, a lot of that was because of the Spirit of Vatican II, because if you read the documents of Vatican II, it says nothing about tearing out altars. It says nothing about the Mass changing all that much. But it's because of the Spirit, and really, again, the new Mass, as it was issued by Paul VI from the Concilium. A lot of problems there. Great documentary online called Mass of the Ages. If you really want to know more about the new Mass and the old Mass and, changes and everything, it's a great documentary that really goes into those details. More than enough to what I have time for to go into here. But anyway, hopefully that makes sense. Guy saying here, I think Thunderbolts could do what Guardians 3 did. Both movies people are liking right now, and it looks like it has good word of mouth, so it has good legs. Here's the other thing too, okay? Because that's the other thing that people brought up with Sinners. They kept bringing up good word of mouth, good word of mouth. There are many movies that have had good word of mouth that have not been able to do what Sinners did. Just because you have good word of mouth does not mean you're automatically going to make X amount of money. Not all good word of mouth is created equal, one could say. So, yeah, just because it has good word of mouth and early buzz around it does not mean it's going to do that, okay? Based on the current tracking, that's not looking like that's going to happen. So we'll have to wait and see. I have been one to say, though, for a while now, I did say, hey, between the Marvel films coming out this year, Thunderbolts might be the one that has the most surprising outcome. And I said, if the film is entertaining, it might actually be able to do something like a Guardians. But it's a big if. Carl Jacobs, given the appointments by Pope Francis, I worry that the Episcopalianization of the Roman Catholic Church. Well, that's the other thing too, right? Because people have also pointed out with this conclave that Pope Francis appointed about 108 of the cardinal electors. So of the 135-ish cardinals that are old enough to vote, who have not reached the age of 80, they are able to vote. And so that's roughly 80% of those cardinals. The issue, though, is people automatically assume, that just means that we're going to get a Francis II. Well, hold on. Who did he nominate? Yes, there are some really, really bad nominations. Really, really bad, or I should say, who are those cardinals? There are some really bad cardinals in there. There's some very questionable cardinals in that group of people that he appointed. But there's also a lot of other ones you're like, oh, I actually like this one. I think it was... there are some in there where you're kind of surprised to actually see who they were appointed by. And I guess that brings up this topic. But first, let me go ahead and pull this up because obviously the first thing that we should be doing before anything else is praying for the repose of the soul of Pope Francis. There's a great app that I use called Intercede. It used to be called the Catholic Novena app. It used to be called the Pray app also, but now it's called Intercede. It's really, really great to gives you routines. It gives you reminders It's just a very good way to kind of increase your prayer life, and it doesn't do so in a way that, I'm kind of critical of the app Hallow. I think Hallow does a little bit too much to keep you dependent on it. Intercede, I think, does just enough to where you're able to stay reliant on, you're able to remain consistent and keeps you on track, but it doesn't give you too much stuff to look at. But anyway, there was a novena for the reposed soul of Pope Francis and for the new Pope that on the app started on April 23rd. So this was just a couple days after Pope Francis had passed away. I know there's other novenas that have started, obviously, because of the Pope's funeral and other things like it. But what I love about it is that it not only has the prayer for Pope Francis, so, may perpetual light shine upon him, may the mercy of God, may his soul and the souls of all the faithful departed through the mercy of God rest in peace, right? A very traditional prayer for those that have died. But then it also has an adaptation of Bishop Athanasius Schneider's prayer for a new pope. And I think it's a really good prayer. And they didn't really change all that much of the prayer either. So I would definitely recommend this to everyone out there. Again, it talks about saying, Lord Jesus Christ, you are the good shepherd. With your almighty hand, you guide your pilgrim church through the storms of each age. Adorn the Holy See with a holy pope who neither fears the power of the world or compromises with the spirit of the age, but preserves, strengthens, and defends the Catholic faith unto the shedding of their blood and observes, protects, and hands on the tradition of the faith. This was like the one change that I noticed was that in Bishop Athanasius Schneider's prayer, it mentions the liturgy specifically, but I kind of like that this mentions the tradition instead because it includes basically everything else. But anyway, I recommend this, and it's good for us to always remember prayer is going to be the most important thing with any of this. That being said, with prayer being the first thing, there's also another site that some people, this is Bishop Athanasius Schneider. He has a lot of very good words here to say about how there needs to be basically a crusade, right? A crusade of prayer for the upcoming conclave. And he's absolutely right? We really do need to have that. Sorry, the site I was looking for was this one. So if people are kind of interested in, okay, who are these cardinals? Where do they stand on different issues? collegeofcardinalsreport.com is a really, really good site, okay? Because it has so many things. So first, there's an interactive map. It tells you, okay, there's 252 cardinals right now. There's 134 voting cardinals. It tells you where they are in the world, right? It breaks it down by country, right? How many are from the United States? How many are from here, from there? How many are created by Francis, right? So it gives you a lot of information. But the one I like the most is where they stand, okay? Because this gives you a little bit of a better idea. So they have profiles on 41 of the cardinals. So unfortunately, not too many, but a lot of these cardinals are in very obscure places and do not really speak publicly on a lot of these issues. And so that's actually kind of a thing where we don't know what the positions of a lot of these cardinals actually are on some of these issues. But we do luckily have it for these 40 and also for those considered papabile, right? These 22 who all have, again, different positions in the church or have done something in regards to the church. So I also like these 10 issues here because they really give you a better idea of who these people are. So, for instance, one is, what do they think about ordaining female deacons? Some are ambiguous. Some have said flat out no. Some have indicated that they actually would be open to it. Blessing same-sex couples, making priestly celibacy optional, restricting the Latin Mass. That's one that's very important to me, obviously. The Vatican-China secret accords. What have they said about that? Do they agree with the China deal or not? That's very important to me also. Promoting a synodal church. Basically, are they on board with the mission that was pushed forward by Pope Francis? This, I think, unfortunately, is going to be a major issue for the more progressive, we could say, bloc. People, unfortunately, oftentimes will try to explain these blocs as conservative, liberal, moderate. Those are more political terms that really don't fit as well into the mold of what goes on in the church. Really, there's Orthodox cardinals and there's progressive cardinals, or actually more accurately, heterodox cardinals, really either heresy or borderline heresy, right? But the synodal church is unfortunately, I think, going to be kind of a litmus test for the more moderate to progressive types, because basically it's, are we going to continue on with Pope Francis's mission of synodal way or not? So the ones that have either an ambiguous fashion or an X are the ones that personally I am much more interested in. But what I was also trying to say earlier about, okay, some people are looking at, okay, how many cardinals has this pope made, or how many cardinals has this pope made, etc. But here's the thing: Cardinal Gerhard Ludwig Müller, who is very much supportive of things like the Latin Mass, who has been very critical openly of Francis, was created by Francis, was made a cardinal by Pope Francis. So we, again, have to keep in mind, just because Pope Francis has made someone a cardinal does not mean they have the same mindset. Look at all of these X's here. Ordaining female deacons? No. Same-sex couples? No. Priestly celibacy? No. Restricting the Latin Mass? No. Vatican Accords? Saying no. He has been against a lot of what Pope Francis has stood for almost every single step of the way. So, again, I look to a person like that, and I think, okay, there might be other cardinals that were chosen and made by Pope Francis that have a very similar mindset. Unfortunately, because we don't have profiles on all of them, we can't do that deep dive to see how many are this or how many of that. But anyway, great site, gives you more information on it. But as far as the papabile that I'm most interested in, or the ones that I would probably be the most happy with, and again, I have no stake in this, or rather, I have no power to determine this. Nothing I say now is going to impact what happens at this, right? But people like to know these things. People like to have a general idea. So the ones that I personally like a lot, people like Cardinal Raymond Leo Burke. He's an American cardinal. Because he's an American, that already puts him basically as being not likely going to be getting it. However, he, as you can see, is against a lot of things that Pope Francis kind of stood for. Again, very consistently across the board in many ways, right? But anyway, Cardinal Burke is one that I really like, but not likely to be elected because of those stances. Another one that has been mentioned quite a bit is Cardinal Peter Erdo. He's, I think, from Hungary. And for him, right, he is a bit ambiguous, or at the very least inconclusive on certain things here, but against making priestly celibacy optional, against restricting the Latin Mass. It's a very important one for me. And so, again, he's one that I would like to see there. So he's not nearly as, quote, conservative or orthodox as someone like a Cardinal Raymond Burke, but maybe that would be enough to get some of the moderates on board of his candidacy, because, again, he's conservative, quote, orthodox on some issues that are pretty important to a lot of people, but he's also relatively unknown on some other issues there. So Erdo, I do like Erdo. Obviously, I like Cardinal Gerhard Ludwig Müller. However, he has become such a person critical of Pope Francis that I think a lot of cardinals are just going to not support someone like him for that alone, because they're going to want someone that's maybe not as vocally against what Pope Francis stood for on different things. So I think that probably has cost him any chance. Pizzaballa is one that I also like, right? Ambiguous on certain things. It says here that he implemented the synodal way during the Patriarchate, inviting everyone. So it looks like, actually, unfortunately, whenever the site updates, it kind of like moves things around, unfortunately. But anyway, it does seem to, again, move those things around. So ordaining female deacons, let's see if that has maybe fixed his position there. Yeah, so he's against that, right? It was saying, it seemed to indicate he was in between on that, but no, that was just because it had the wrong thing showing for some reason. So he's against that. He's against restricting the old Mass. That's a big one for me. But a lot of his beliefs on things are kind of unknown. He's, again, a bit ambiguous on synodal way. So he implemented things. He obviously followed what the Pope wanted. That's a good thing. Ambiguous on climate change. Again, I think that it's good for us to care about the environment, but at the same time, doesn't seem like he is that radical on that either. And then he's against the German synodal way because they are in open heresy. Anyone who's supportive of them or ambiguous of them probably cannot be trusted. That's why Cardinal Parolin, again, he is seen as a moderate / progressive candidate that might be favored there. I don't trust him for a lot of his stances on a lot of things. So anyway, for me, though, Pizzaballa, I think, would be good. I've heard some good things about Cardinal Ranjit. I believe he is representative of Sri Lanka. So again, he is very much against a lot of the things that are very important. He's also for climate change, though. Like he is for Pope Francis's view of climate change, right? Of us being more careful over the environment. I think that's an issue, right? That is one that again, as far as what he says about it, I don't have as much of a problem with that. Ambiguous when it comes to the synodal way of Pope Francis. Let's see the other things that he holds to here. Unfortunately had to update that for some reason. Let's see. Where did he go? There it is. So against ordaining female deacons, against blessing same-sex couples, against priestly ordination, priestly celibacy being optional, the restriction on Latin Mass he's against too. So really, again, mostly a Orthodox person, with the one exception being the environment. But hey, if that's enough to get more moderates on board, again, there's a lot of upsides there, it seems. Cardinal Robert Sarah, probably my favorite, honestly. And again, when it comes to a lot of these, Pizzaballa actually probably has the better chance of the ones that I've mentioned. Him and Erdo are said to be kind of like top contenders because of what they've done, showing themselves to be good administrators in certain ways. So it could just be that might be what the church is looking for. Cardinal Sarah is also one that's oftentimes viewed. He's kind of like the online favorite too, where people just really like him. He's very, quote, based on certain things, very open about things. And as you can see, very clearly Orthodox also in his general teachings. And so he's probably the last one on this list that I would actually be mostly positive of. As far as the ones that I like that have a chance, I think Cardinal Sarah has a chance. The one thing against him is he's 79. So because he's right on the cusp of 80, basically, if the Cardinals want a transition pope, someone who won't be pope for a very long time, we could very well see a Cardinal Sarah end up being elected pope. If they expect a long-term choice, that'd be Cardinal Pizzaballa, because he's 60. He just turned 60 not long after the pope died, I believe, actually. So that would mean he'd be pope for 20, 30 years, maybe. I don't know how old Cardinal Ranjith would be. Let's see. He is 77. So actually, he is a bit on the older side, so his would also be more of a transitional pontificate, but he's also from Sri Lanka, so that could also be, hey, if they're really trying to fit the whole, hey, go to the margins that Pope Francis was promoting, that could be the way to do it, right? So anyway, probably spend a little bit more time on that, but that's a site that I can just get lost in so many ways. All right, Christoph, do you think last pope in end times might be straight up anti-pope and call himself Peter II? I don't get caught up in that stuff, dude. A lot of that prophecy stuff gets kind of misconstrued in a lot of ways. Gage64 saying, only the first ace announced on 4K, which is strange because the 30th anniversary of When Nature Calls is this year. Had both of them on my wanted list for 2025 video earlier this year. Okay, I thought I remember seeing it on there. Excuse me. But I wish it was both. Cthulhu, haha, you have to watch Thunderbolt, sucker. I offer earnest prayers for your health. I appreciate it. Keely Chow, what's going on? Good morning from Hong Kong. Welcome. Geek Truth. Honestly, the best steelbook of the year so far for me is probably Constantine. Great debossing on that one and great 4K transfer. Agreed. I do like that one a lot. I honestly enjoy Flight Risks a bit more. Gee, do you believe the Deadline articles on which movie made the most profit 2024? No. Deadline's articles are always trash. Always trash. Because I remember was it last year's or was it the year before that they did the whole they had Ninja Turtles on there and they included the merchandising in their calculations. And it's like, whoa. Get out of here. No, their stuff is garbage. Keely Chow, everyone's doing okay. We actually had me and Freya were both sick this weekend, but we're okay. Carlo Pizza, yeah. People online like Pizzaballa just because of his name, but he's actually also it seems like a very orthodox cardinal, which is why I like him. Hardwick, I don't believe the claim that cardinals only meet occasionally. I've seen multiple ones together in my yard several times this year alone, usually at the bird feeder. I like that. Christoph from Vatican II. Those who, through no fault of their own, don't remember what's after, but it's another example of changing original text. Yeah. Again, there's a lot of issues there. Learning a lot today, says Laura. Good. Christoph, do you think Bishop Schneider could become pope? He's very traditional. He's someone I would love to see as pope, but he has to first be named a cardinal, and he is a bishop. He's a very obscure bishop, to be honest. He's not a major bishop of a major diocese. He, I think, is actually only a kind of like what we would call like a helper bishop. So he's not even like the primary bishop of the area that he's in. He's still great. I mean, I'm not trying to demean him in any way, but cardinals are typically a bit higher on the chain. Now, if there is the instance that we get a Cardinal Pizzaballa as pope, or especially a Cardinal Sarah or someone like that, then you could maybe see a person like Bishop Schneider get the red hat. And if that happens, that would be amazing. Because I think Bishop Schneider is so crystal clear on teaching, very holy man as well. Someone that really, I think, could especially help us with the liturgy, because his solution to the liturgy is really just to help return us to a much more traditional way of worship. Now, do I think it's going to happen? No, I'm going to be honest. I don't. But again, all things possible with God. Father saying, Hallow the app has become a little too big for its britches. All the hype it's getting is setting in for the fall. Oh, it is. Really, it is. And they are putting way too much stock in their celebrities. And that's why I stopped using it, because it's like, whoa, I thought this was supposed to be a prayer app, not a, hey, let's pray with celebrities app. Shorty Short saying, I posted a video on Discord. Guy went to Revenge of the Sith at the Hollywood Theater and Hayden showed up, but his lightsaber broke. Disney had to borrow one from a fan. Oh my goodness, that's amazing. I saw one video where someone was yelling like, give it a spin, and then like he does like the backhand spin. That may have been from a different video or a different time. But yeah, it's amazing what they were able to do. Sacre Bleu, the deadly Pocozoda. What's up, Sacre Bleu? Hello. Oh, an explanation as to why Pope Francis didn't request a Novus Ordo funeral mass in the vernacular of his native language, Spanish, or is he just too bridge? No. Yeah, so it was Novus Ordo. I mean, that it absolutely was the full Novus Ordo mass. It's because he's the Pope, and it's in Rome. So it's going to primarily be in Italian and Latin. I mean, that's just kind of the way in which the Vatican liturgies actually end up being. So anyway, yeah, not all that much surprising actually from that. Hardwick, there's a female deacon named Phoebe in the book of Romans. She is not a deacon, Hardwick. She is not a deacon. This is a common misconception. So when it comes to any seeming, mention of these people, there are basically, unfortunately, they're given the name deaconess, which really is not appropriate. There were women in the early church who were given very specific roles because of necessity and modesty. So at that time, when people were getting baptized, it was not very appropriate for the male ministers to baptize some of the female members. And so there needed to be, I think actually some of the places and locations, it was actually traditional in those times to actually be baptized naked. And it was actually the role of the women to actually hold up the garment so that it would protect the priest and the bishop's eyes from modesty, right? But still allow for the baptism to take place. Those were the kinds of things that they were doing. It was things very specific to, modesty and things of that nature. They never had ministerial roles, ever. So that's a false notion that she was a deacon, all right? Because deacons specifically if we're talking about the scriptures, right? What were the role of deacons? Deacons' role were set aside to be handling money, to make sure that Jews and Gentiles both received what was needed in their communities, to ensure that the widows got what they needed, etc. They were the ones put in charge. That was the original role of deacons. Female deacons with that never existed. Christoph, since you said liberal conservative isn't quite the same in the Catholic Church, I take you could have progressive cardinal who preferred Trump and a more traditional who would prefer Harris. And again, they wouldn't prefer either of them, though. Like you would have a progressive and a Orthodox cardinal next to each other, and both would be laughing at both of those candidates. King and Remsky, do you get worried the Catholic Church may be one bad decision away from the end of the church? No, because the church will never die. The church will never fail. Just because there could potentially be a corrupt pope. We've had corrupt popes before. Again, people oftentimes, I think, have such a very limited view of history. Go ahead and look up the cadaver synod. I think it's what sometimes it's called. The cadaver trial. There's different names for it. Pope dug up his predecessor, put his corpse on trial for heresy. Yeah, we've got some doctrinal problems for sure. I'm not trying to mince words with how problematic our current time is. We've had objectively worse popes who have done worse things. Father, follow up to the prophecies. I had a scroopy at my last parish who brought a lot of grapes and bourbon in for me to bless because Jesus said they would sustain one during the famine. Oh boy. Father Miller, this from the website Countdown to the Kingdom. Oh boy. Merchandising. Auxiliary bishop. Yeah, I think he might be auxiliary. Let's see. Caveat ties. Matt Verlack bought Accountant 2 for $155 million on critic list group box office tycoon. Will he make profit? Oh, I haven't fully looked at that in a long time. Christoph, what's the difference between Francis synod and German? Oh, yeah. So first off, a synod traditionally is always understood to be a meeting of bishops. It's always been a meeting of bishops, okay? The German synodal way is basically a process that the Germans took on themselves, separate from the synodal way that Pope Francis had put forward, okay? And what the Germans did was they basically came up with their own understanding, and they were actually moving and are moving their regional German church in a very heretical way. right? They are all about basically trying to say, yeah, guess what? We're going to make female deacons. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Things that are very much heretical in comparison to the teachings of the church, right? And so basically there are some that would say, yes, the German church should have the right to do that. Whereas others would say, no, the German church can't just go ahead and do whatever it wants and change teachings whenever it wants, just because that's what their cardinals think, or that's just because of what their German regional bishops think. So basically, it's the German church acting on its own, is the German synodal way, which is why most people are, again, if they're good and if they are people that we want to be pope, are going to have a big X in that category. Whereas the synodal way of Pope Francis is, honestly, I couldn't even explain that one to you because it's the most mind-numbingly confusing thing, even to me as a Catholic, because what does it even mean to be synodal? What actually is a synodal church? These are things that they come up with answers with, but the answers themselves, it's like basically they define synodal with the word synod in it. So it loses all meaning, right? Again, a synod has always been a meeting of bishops, but now in the new springtime of the church, a synod is a meeting of some bishops and then some lay people, and then it's a mess. It's a big, big, big mess. That's also why, again, I really hope that future pope is very much like, no, we're going to end all that, because it's very confusing and not beneficial to the church. King and Remsky, I heard rumor of Cardinal Pizza likes pineapples. No, it's a lie. That is a lie. Father Christopher Miller saying, if we can survive Pope John the 12th, we'll survive this. Yes, let's not even go into the fact that there was a time where there were 3 popes. Now, obviously, eventually they were declared anti-popes. And we had a true pope that came out of it, but still, it does happen. But anyway, I have caught up with the comments, so and we're over time. So I appreciate every person being in the chat tonight. This was a lot of fun. We got to talk a little bit of the box office. Hopefully that cleared up any confusion as to why last week I was saying Sinners was a flop and why this week I'm saying Sinners is actually on the path to making profit, but also why budgets matter, facts matter, and actually hearing the words that I say matters quite a bit as well. And also, of course, we talked about, Pope Francis. We pray for the repose of his soul. And then there's a conclave. So kind of going back to another question that someone did have. So the conclave, it starts May 7th. All right, so it starts next Wednesday. There's one vote on the first day. As I mentioned earlier, usually doesn't happen where people get the votes they need on that first day. The second day, there are 4 votes that happen. In the past 100 years, since the early 1900s, there has never been a conclave go past 5 days. That's been the longest, okay? So the chances of us not knowing who the next pope will be by next Friday or Saturday is not likely. We'll probably know who the pope is by next Friday or Saturday, because they'll have one vote on that Wednesday. No results will come from that. It'll be black smoke. That Thursday, there will be 4 votes. And we could have a vote either on that day, right, those 4 votes, or on the day after, I think is the most likely occurrence. So either on the second or third day of the conclave, so either on the Thursday or Friday of the conclave, I think that we will have a pope. Now, I say that, I'm just a guy on the internet talking. I have no insights on this. I can only speak to, okay, historically what has happened, and in general, what are we likely and most likely to see? And that's kind of where we stand with this. And so anyway, that is where we stand. We'll have a conclave start next week, and we'll probably have a pope by next weekend, and God willing. And we obviously need to take this time to pray for the cardinals, pray that they are inspired by the Holy Spirit and that they heed the words of the Holy Spirit, and that they choose a good and holy man to be the next pope and to guide our church out of this time of confusion and darkness and into the light once again. So anyway, thank you all very much for watching tonight. This has been a ton of fun. You guys are awesome. Please make sure you smash the like button, loud the fire button, obviously smash the rumble button as well. And I guess I'll see a lot of you guys on Friday for Friday Night Tights. And of course, box office preview on Friday morning, most likely. And we'll be talking about, of course, I don't know why, but we'll be talking about Thunderbolts. Anyway, you guys are amazing and beautiful people. Again, thank y'all very much for being here. Thank y'all to the super chatters. Thank y'all to the lurkers. Thank you to those that liked the video, the stream, and everything else. You guys are amazing. I love you guys. I love you. Worst pope was likely Rodrigo Borgia. He definitely is up there. That's for sure. Anyway, love you guys. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members, starting off first with my people on Patreon, Father Luca Illich and Miss Martin Muses. Check out her YouTube channel by the same name, Miss Martin Muses. Also to my Subscribestar people, Matt317. Check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Matt317. And lastly to my YouTube member, Mr. Roy. Shout out to you, good sir. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below where you get access to that. Also, you get access to a plethora of other things. You get your name listed at the end of every live stream and video, like you saw in those names that came up before this video started. And also access to a giveaways channel that I host over on the Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Steelbooks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff. So check that out if you're interested in that. Also, I have an exclusive podcast that I hold at least once a month, and it's always a good time, and you get extra bonus content with that also. So if any of that sounds interesting, again, check out that top link in the video description below. You guys are all amazing, and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless.